The Collective Whisper Podcast with Simon K. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Collective Whisper Podcast. I am your host, Simon K. Welcome to the show, everybody. We hope you're enjoying the show so far. We're getting close to the end of season 2 and it's been a great season. We've had some amazing guests and we've still a few more to go. So we hope you stay tuned. Please follow, subscribe and press those buttons where you see them. We really appreciate it. So this week we're going to talk to a very special guest. I'd like to welcome today Zoe Holohan. On the 23rd of July 2018, in the seaside town of Mati in Greece, Zoe Holohan and her husband of 4 days were enjoying the beginning of their honeymoon. Then disaster struck. Unprecedented wildfires swept through the area, killing 102 people. Zoe and Brian fled their villa, chased by the flames, running for their lives. Ultimately, Zoe was one of the few survivors from the area, having been miraculously rescued from the boot of a burning car just seconds from death. She suffered severe burns all over her face and body, and her beloved husband Brian lost his life before her eyes. In her book, As the Smoke Clears, Zoe reveals the emotional journey of grappling with the loss of her true love and partner, as well as her own incredible fight for survival, learning how to walk, talk, and use her limbs again, and a future facing PTSD and a heavily scarred body. As the Smoke Clears is a deeply personal journey through a life-altering year, which at its heart teaches us to seek hope, happiness, and sometimes even humour in the most tragic of circumstances, and to find comfort in the enduring kindness of our fellow human beings. Okay, Zoe Holohan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely talking to you this afternoon.
It's great to have you on. We've been trying to get you on for a little bit and you're finally here and it's been worth the wait. So I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. How is everything with you?
Everything is good, I have to say. It's busy, which, look, I love being busy. It's the opposite end of the spectrum that I absolutely hate. Recently got over COVID, I'm delighted to say. I'm allowed to mention the C word, am I? Or does everyone just squeal as soon as you say that word these days? So I'm happy to say I got through that rather unscathed, and just back doing what I like doing the best, writing and doing talks and things like that, and clearly talking to you today.
Brilliant! It's great chatting to you. And just since you're mentioning COVID there, because obviously you're receiving some treatments and you've had you've had hospital visits, is COVID kind of a bit more risky for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was absolutely terrified of catching it, in all honesty. I'm very lucky. I get some rather marvellous medical treatments, as you know, and assistance. And I had just literally received my second booster. So I was ahead of the game, so to speak, when I caught it. So, it wasn't pleasant, I'll be honest with you, as I'm sure anybody listening will agree, the majority of which will agree. Lost my taste, lost my sense of smell for about 2 weeks, or a little bit over 2 weeks. Did manage to lose a few pounds though into the mix, so there's the silver lining. But the I know that's always such a woman's thing to say, but I think the important thing to note here really is this is the COVID diet. But the important thing to note here is that I have been really, really scared because I did have a lot of lung damage from the fire, and I was terrified of catching this. I feel blessed that I caught it late in the day when I had double vaccine and a double booster under my belt. So I feel very lucky to be living in a country where you can get access to those so easily. So I'm fine. I'm virtually as fighting fit as I'm going to get. Let's put it that way.
I'm glad you got over it okay, and that's the problem, isn't it? As you said, you can have sometimes complications, and you hear people having long COVID, and especially for you, if you had previous lung damage, I mean, long COVID wouldn't really have gone too well with that. It would have been a bad mixture. So I'm glad you got over it, and I'm glad you got through it okay, and at least you're fighting fit again for other treatments that you may have coming up.
Yeah, I find that the fact that I've just used the term fighting fit highly ironic for me, but I'm as fighting fit as I can be, let's put it that way. But look, yes, as I said, I got through it. I got through it relatively unscathed, so that's
I see obviously there in your LinkedIn profile and see on your media kind of obligations and everything. You're very busy and you seem to be doing a lot of public speaking and a lot of events. So is it something now after the pandemic that's things have really, heated up for you and you're really busy on the circuit?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, all of a sudden, everything seems, it's like, the 46A bus, you wait forever, and then they all come in a row. Things
Yeah.
are really beautifully picking up, I would say, from the motivational talks side of things. I'm very much enjoying partaking in those. I have been doing those throughout the pandemic, but of course we've been hiding away behind the screen in our little cyberspace world. So it's a very different experience. For instance, I recently gave a talk in Croke Park in front of several hundred people. Slightly knee wobbling moment. I'm going to be honest with you, it was mildly terrifying standing up on that stage in front of so many people, because it was effectively the first real live event, even though I was so used to doing them in front of camera. There's, as you know, a very different experience when you're live on stage. But really, really wonderful to be back interacting with real human beings.
As you said it there, it doesn't matter how many times you speak on camera or, off camera or on stage. But when you have big crowds like that, it can be pretty daunting, and people still get stage fright after years and years of doing it. So how do you have like a special technique to help you kind of calm yourself before you go on, or how do you center yourself?
Oh gosh, how do I center myself? I usually find a fixed spot in the room and I stare at that for a couple of seconds. To be honest with you,
Right.
the fear wouldn't really overtake me, but yeah, I had a second of, oh gosh, this is very different to sitting at home in front of your screen. Let's put it that way. But I shook that off fairly quickly, and given the fact that one of the topics I was discussing was trying to encourage people to embrace their fears, to overcome the things that are holding them back. I found that in my head quite ironic, considering I was momentarily a little bit anxious standing up there. So practice what you preach, girl, and just get on with it. So that's my little inner mantra: just get on with it. What's the worst that can happen?
But like you said there, you were practicing what you were preaching because you were up there and you were doing it. And I always say that's a motto I always have, is that, face your fears. And I always think we all have these fears and little fears and big fears that sometimes change the direction of our lives. And they can be something simple like, afraid of the dark. And I always think you have to sometimes just sit in the dark, sleep in the dark, and try and get over it, because it doesn't matter if it's the school bully or it doesn't matter if it's the dog down the street. You have to just kind of say, no, I'm not going to back away from this. I have to find a way around it, or do it a different way, but face it in some kind of way, don't you?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a great power in engaging with your fears. When you overcome something that's been holding you back for a considerable period of time, it's a very empowering feeling. I have a silly one. So I force myself every single day to cross over the railway bridge in my village. Now, I hate bridges. I'm actually terrified of bridges. So every day I force myself to go over the bridge. Now, this is only a very minor fear in the greater scheme of things, but to me, it's kind of proving that I can do it for myself. And there's always this little sense of accomplishment on the other side. I'm still a bit of a chicken, I hold my breath most of the time as I'm crossing over it, but nonetheless, I make myself do it every day. And like I said, you do feel you're gaining a little bit of control in life by doing these things. So I'm very much one of those people, particularly, I suppose, in this, what I call my second half of life. I feel that my life now is so dramatically different to my life a few years ago, where my worst fears were actually realized. And it changes your mindset on pretty much everything you encounter from there on out. So even the silly thing like crossing the bridge, to me, I kind of force myself to do it on a daily basis. And that would be, the least of them, I suppose. But yeah, I genuinely believe there is a power in trying to overcome things that make you afraid.
Yes, and the great thing about that is, by you crossing that bridge, and as you said, you feel like a chicken, but I suppose the most important is don't play chicken with the train. So get across that bridge, and then when you're across there, you do feel better. But
duly noted, duly noted.
But when you're across, that's when you have that empowerment. But of course, the next day you have to face it again. And for some people, the fear is as strong. For other people, it's a little less. So we all deal with these fears differently. And I mean, it's a great exercise. People should do more of those kind of things. Just find that one thing they're scared of, whether it's public speaking, whether it's, driving a car, whether it's, there's so many things we can be afraid of that we avoid, isn't there?
Absolutely. And, look, let's be honest, we're coming out, the tail end. It's not quite done yet, but we're coming out of the tail end of this pandemic. And I think what's been rather interesting over the last couple of years is that people that I always assumed were the most self-assured, were the strongest, have possibly for the first time in their lives have had to deal with anxiety. And I found this quite fascinating because the strongest, what is it they say, the mightiest tree falls the hardest. I found it quite surprising, how much anxiety has affected certain individuals. The only way to overcome that is to talk it through, in my opinion. And sometimes you need to go to an expert. Sometimes, if you're lucky enough to have, an understanding partner or a friend or a family member around you, you can talk it out with them. But I think basically anxiety has hit us all in a very different fashion over the last couple of years. And it is a topic that I'm interested in kind of delving into during these talks, because I think it's something that resonates with a lot of people, whereas it may not have done so. You and I were having this conversation 3 years ago.
Right, exactly. I understand, yeah. But, from what happened to you and to where you are now is, it's an incredible achievement, and you've come such a long way. And it's that kind of daily battle, isn't it? And of course, for you, having to relive things and to go over things, but then that bravery you have to go on stage or to address people and talk about these things over and over and put them in different ways so it doesn't, bore you to hear the same story every day, but you can't get away from obviously the real story and what happened. So for you, does there come a point when you're talking where you say, okay, I have a routine. I can do it for a few days, but then I need a break? Or how do you manage dealing with the pressure of speaking about the event?
Yes, absolutely. There comes a point when I have to step away. And I can do it in the most cowardly fashion, hide under the duvet, which I've been known to do for a day or two. Or I can just step out of that part of my life for a few hours. But it still catches me unawares sometimes. Recently I was doing a talk with a smaller group of people, and I was just talking about Brian, and I had a copy of my book by my side, and there's Brian's beautiful face on the cover, and it just caught me unawares. I was talking about him in very jovial, warm terms, saw his face, it's our wedding day, and literally I could just feel the catch in the throat and the tear threatened, behind the eye, and I kind of went, oh God, pull yourself together. It's never easy. It's easier because it's 4 years this month down the line, but it's never an easy thing to talk about. And unfortunately for me, at the current stage where I'm at, because obviously I'm writing in the newspaper and I'm giving talks, etc. Where I'm at, I suppose if you want to call it the job I'm doing right now, its origins are from the tragedy that occurred on the 23rd of July, 2018. Believe you me, I'm only too well aware of that. So unfortunately, in order for people to understand where I want to go to, I have to go back to those origins. I don't have to overly focus on them for, say, an entire talk, but it gives context to the current topics that I am discussing.
Of course.
And otherwise people wouldn't know why the hell I'm here talking about what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, I think that's it because, we see so many people in the public kind of arena talking about events and tragedies that have changed their lives. And of course, it doesn't matter who it is. I've had some guests here talk about suicide and family loss and all these different things. And some people can be critics and say, oh, well, they're looking for the attention and doing this. But it's not like that. There's lots of people who have lost people and will never talk about it. They're maybe helping themselves, but they can't get that inner strength to help other people. But the people who can talk about it, they are there helping other people deal with this grief, and they're helping other people manage the grief, and they're helping other people deal with their anxieties and their fears. You can't do good things in this world without somebody hating you for it. So the thing to do is just do it and forget the begrudgers and forget the critics, because there might be two people you're bothering by that, but there could be 10,000 people that you're helping. So you just have to keep going and push on, don't you?
Absolutely. And I mean, you're so right. There's always going to be somebody that will object to your choice of action, and I'm my own biggest critic anyway. So, they can't say anything to me that I probably didn't say to myself in the darkest hour in the early hours of the morning. But yeah, I mean, when people are trying to talk about these things, grief, bereavement, severe illness, tragedy. Often, well, in my own case, I find it, or maybe I'm performing self-therapy here, or maybe I'm just trying to make sense of it, or maybe it's a process where it's a hard thing to say, I'm looking for the good in this. It's a very difficult thing to come up with, that any good could have come from that date. But I don't know. As you can tell now, even as I'm saying this, I'm trying to make sense of it myself. Look, I could either choose to stay in the darkness and let it erode and eventually do me in, or I can choose to take a look at the greater experience thereafter, which I did, and see the amazing gifts that I was given in the process of recovery, which is an ongoing process even now, 4 years on, and take the good from that. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that I'm taking good from July the 23rd. I'm taking good from everything that happened from that date to today. And obviously, we're in July at the moment. I'm very conscious that this is, I'm tiptoeing on eggshell time, because, in a couple of weeks' time, my wedding anniversary will come up. And then 4 days later, Brian's death anniversary will come up. So it's a time when I'm thinking about this stuff and dreaming about it constantly.
Yeah, and this date, even just looking at it on paper, seeing that date there, for you, it must be hugely significant, because I'm sure for you, even, 4 years later, whatever, you can't help but like counting down these days. And there's all these important dates that come after, as you said, your wedding day, the day of the event happened, Brian's death, and then later your dad's death and everything. So there's a lot of really important and, very tragic dates within this month or so. And it's a really hard time for you. And I can imagine there are moments like that when you want to go and hide under the duvet, but, fair play to you. You are facing them, and you're doing it time and time again. And I can imagine the amount of people you're helping and you're influencing and you're encouraging to get on with their lives and to get over it is amazing.
Well, I really, really hope so. The very first talk I gave was for the Bereavement Foundation, the Hospice Foundation. And it was just concerning what I describe as the insanity of grief. I mean, I know Dr. Ross said there were 5 stages of grief, which is absolute nonsense, because there are about 555 stages of grief. But the reason I chose or agreed, but it is true, I mean, there's,
Yes.
there's no rhyme or reason to how any individual, because we're all individuals, so we will do this individually in our own way.
Everybody has different ways.
Absolutely. And the thing that I found fascinating, and the reason I agreed to do that talk, and this was probably my very first talk of consequence, was because of the volume, the astonishing volume of people from all over the country and the UK as well, but the majority would be based in Ireland, who responded to the book. And they wrote to me, and they DM'd, and they emailed me. And it was, at some stage, actually, it became quite overwhelming, the volume, because I wanted to respond to everybody. But I realized that people actually want to talk about grief. They want to talk about the stages. They want to talk about the anniversaries. They want to talk about the guilty feeling for the first time that you laugh. They want to talk about how to remember and honor the legacy of the person that they've lost. And what really surprised me, in fact, was the varying age group, and there was grief. Unfortunately, it's like taxes. It's going to touch everybody at some stage or other. And I found that the type of people who were opening up and contacting me. There's one man in particular. He lives in a rural community. I would hazard a guess that he might be, a little bit older than me, but possibly maybe 10 years older, maybe in his 50s, or early 60s. And his wife passed very suddenly in the early stages of COVID. And he was so isolated. And he had children, but he didn't want to burden them with his grief. And all he wanted to simply do was speak his wife's name and talk about it. So we started to communicate on a Facebook message, and this conversation went on for a certain period of time. And I was very concerned about this man because he didn't seem to have any outlet. And then I started to wonder, well, how many other people are like this? And to be honest with you, that's when I really started to look at these talks and see, well, maybe this is what you can do, Zoe. Maybe there's something good you can do here. That if I can talk, because for me, talking about Brian and talking about my father, Colin, helped me process the pain. And it also helped me remember them and honour them. But I'm not unique. I'm not special. Everybody probably feels the same way about the person that they love, that they've lost. So there's power. There's power in conversation. Death kind of has been treated like one of the last taboos in Ireland, I feel. People feel guilty about talking about it. Less so now, by the way, post-pandemic, which is interesting. I mean, that this has been freed up a little bit. It's become more regular. People are beginning to talk about the process of bereavement more frequently with less embarrassment, let's put it that way. But it's certainly something that I think, as I said, everyone is going to experience at some stage or other in life, unfortunately. So isn't it a good thing if we open up that conversation a little more?
It's one of these things I think with the new generation are also influencing, the middle-aged and the older generation to speak up about these things because, for too long people have held in the grief and, it's been a very kind of conservative and traditional thing. We don't talk about it so much. And, especially in Ireland, death, sometimes people would laugh about things more than actually speak the truth about it. So, we have a very dark humor and we make fun of dark situations to get over the grief, for jokes to ourselves, but jokes even at funerals and everything. But it's the grieving process after all of that we have to learn to get better at, isn't it? And it's whether it's losing a child or a husband or father or mother, we all have to find ways. And now, I mean, there's so many public forums and so many great public speakers like yourself and so many great podcasts and so many great articles and books. It's a little easier for people to find something because maybe they don't know who to reach out to. But now they can say, well, hold on, I'm going to read this. Okay, there's some advice there. So I think it's opened many doors for people with that grief to be able to find an outlet for it.
I would sincerely hope so. I mean, I certainly know there are lots of forums out there and there are lots of helplines. And, sometimes it can be just with the gentleman that I referred to a moment ago. I eventually persuaded him to go talk to the GP because, I was actually seriously worried about him at that stage. The other thing about the Irish community in particular, I think we're fiercely superstitious. So I think certainly I'm going to include my own family in this. I think we think if we say it, it's going to happen. So if we don't mention the D word, we're going to dodge that bullet for as long as possible. I think that, and you're absolutely right.
We have this thing where it's like, oh, well, don't speak of the dead, or, always speak well and always, don't invite death to your door. But I think, as you said, death doesn't occur because we talk about it. Death happens for other reasons, and that superstition can really hold people back. But when people die because of accidents or illness or old age, it's just something that's coming and we can't avoid it, but we can talk about it before. And now you have these death doulas or doulas, I'm not sure the pronunciation. You have people that talk about death and help people to die. So you see, we've come a long way, haven't we?
I think so. And I think you made a very good point earlier as well when you said that it's post-funeral. It's post-wake period that we're working on. We're getting better at it. because, all of that. Oh God, my heart broke for people during the pandemic that had nobody around them when they were burying or saying goodbye to someone they love. And we all sat through, I know I sat through at least half a dozen funerals myself, sitting on the other end of the computer, and watching an empty church or an empty crematorium, where maybe at maximum half a dozen people would be dispersed in the congregation. Because part of the grieving process is community. It is getting that support from people around you. So, that was absolutely devastating to witness. But after the period of time, as you said, after the funeral is when really the talking needs to begin. Or it's just a case of not ignoring it, not pretending that this hasn't happened to your friend or your colleague, and recognizing that they may be going through a difficult time, or recognizing maybe they need a distraction, but it's just, I don't want to become the death girl either. I don't want to become obsessed with the topic, but I do think that there's positivity,
Oh, no.
but there is positivity being able to include it in a conversation.
Yeah.
I don't wear that badge with pride.
You'll be the new Irish superhero.
I can't imagine what. Mind you, I do wear a copious amount of black, so I probably have the outfit ready to go at any stage.
Well, if they approach you from Netflix about doing the TV show and they give you that title, say, no, I've been avoiding this issue.
Yeah, I think we can save that.
So Zoe, let's go back before the event. Obviously, what happened in Greece just a little bit, and in your career before the event in Greece, you were working in newspapers, in advertising, and in the build up to you getting married and going on honeymoon, was that a big process, and was it something that you had been planning for such a long time, or was it something that you kind of put together very quickly and said, oh, let's go to Greece? Tell us what happened that way.
Well, I mean, this was my second marriage, and it was also Brian's second marriage. I mean, we weren't little cherubic kids by the time we rocked up the aisle, so we were both in our early 40s at that stage. So, I didn't want the mammoth white wedding, but as it turned out, it was a magnificent day, a magnificent event. Like anybody else, there are stresses in the run up to weddings. They never go easily. For me, I suppose one of the main things that concerned me was my father's health. Even though in the back of my head, in a very immature sense, I always thought my dad was immortal. So it never really occurred to me, no matter how ill he was with cancer, that he was actually going to pass away. And that sounds moronic, given the topic that we've just been talking about. But I really thought that he would beat this thing. And sadly, eventually he got the better of him, let's put it that way, for a variety of reasons. So that was worrying in the run up to the wedding. But Brian and I, we were a cracking team. We did everything together. And this was novel. He's the first partner in my life that I really felt that we worked together in everything. We always had a common goal. And so the wedding was planned together, and every little step of that journey, including looking after my dad, we did together in advance of that date. So we were very excited, and it wasn't a huge event. We had about 80 people, 80 guests on the day. And look, I was just, I just couldn't wait to marry him. I was absolutely crackers in love. So, it was on this stunning day, an absolutely beautiful day, which, as you know, you cannot take for granted in Ireland, even in the middle of July. But it was, the sun was splitting the stones that day. So, it can be hard to talk about,
Of course. And
sorry, but because it was such a happy day.
No, I understand. But I think, for those things, even though they're hard to talk about, it's nice as well to look back on and have that good memory of such a wonderful day, So for you, I imagine there's moments that you don't want to think about, and then other moments are emotional and hard to think of. But it's nice to have those good memories in there too, those amazing days and you spent with Brian. And can I ask you, with going to Greece, is it somewhere, had you ever been there before, or, was it your first time there, and was it a completely different kind of feel for you? You had never experienced that before, or had you been there many times?
Well, I'd been there when I was young. I was there on a girls' holiday, I think probably in my early 20s. Um, and I've been back to Santorini as well in later years. But no, I haven't been on the mainland, if you want to go with that. So I studied. I use the term loosely. I studied Greek civilization in college, but please don't quiz me on anything regarding that, because the memory is a little short to pieces these days.
So, my area of expertise.
Good. I'm relieved of that. But I really wanted to go to Greece. I really wanted to go to Greece, and I wanted to do a little bit of island hopping, but I also wanted to see some of the landmarks and the ruins. And to be honest with you, that caused me a huge amount of pain thereafter, because I was the one who convinced Brian to go to Greece. He actually didn't want to go there in the middle of the summer. He claimed it would be too hot. But I used my feminine wiles of persuasion, and lo and behold, we ended up going there. And I will be very honest here. It took me an awful lot of therapy thereafter to let go of some, if not all, but some of that survivor's guilt, because, had I not chosen this spot, we'd probably still be here today. But, that's the way the dice rolled, unfortunately.
That's something with death and grief that comes along with it, because whether it's a car crash where you survive and somebody doesn't, and maybe you made the decision to drive, or you said, let's go this way. And I think that happens in lots of situations, that somebody makes a decision, and then because of that decision, they're just on that path. They don't cause the events to happen, but they're just in that wrong place at the wrong time. But for them, they have this kind of feeling that, oh, it's because of me, and it's not. It never is, and it never will be. But it's just they feel like, well, I'm the only one here. I survived. They lost their lives, so it's even worse for you then, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I had tremendous difficulty with the fact for a considerable period of time that I was the survivor and he wasn't. Brian was always the strong one. I mean, he was the leader, and even on the day as we're running for our lives, I was relying on him, and he promised that we would make it. And as soon as Brian promised something, it usually would be so. So yeah, in any kind of traumatic event like this, yes, it's going to take a long time to work it out. Look, there's no rhyme or reason on it. 102 people were killed that day, and thousands of people like me were either severely injured or lost their homes or their livelihoods or their cars, and their cars in the greater scheme of things aren't a big deal. But really, I mean, this was just Dante's Inferno, the pit of hell, on that particular date. And I know I lost Brian, but I know so many other people suffered tremendously too. I'm not suggesting there's a comfort in that, but it does help you kind of take out the why me or why only me, because it's not why only me. It's not why only me. Lots of people have experienced tragedy down through the years. And yeah, you just have to accept that and try and move forward. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
Yeah, and of course, because as you said, it's not why me, it's not only you. As you said, there's for all of those 102 people, there are many survivors who could have perished, but they didn't. So the great thing is that you can find some relief in the fact that it's not just you having this, survivor guilt syndrome. It's them as well, and it's something I think that's part of the grieving process. Whether it's your grandfather just passing away and you didn't get a chance to say goodbye to them, or whether it's you being involved in something that you felt, okay, if we had done that, or if we hadn't done that, things would have been different. So I think it's all part of the process, and you can't escape it in any way.
I agree. And in fact, it's interesting you should say that. I recently had a conversation with somebody I used to work with who lost his father and tried desperately to get there and didn't get there on time, and he was feeling guilty about this. And, I was trying to explain to him that, this was just, like I said, the roll of the dice, and he can't carry that guilt. And his father knew he loved him very much. But yeah, it takes a while to get that, that mind uh, thought process. It takes a while to work that stuff out. Thankfully, I had a rather marvelous therapist who worked with me consistently for 2 years. I'm not really sure I'd be here doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't had all of that help. So and she certainly helped me um, through that.
And that's good. I mean, it's great that these people can help you and have helped you, To talk about the event, I don't want to go into too much detail, and we'll treat it very sensitively. But on that day it happened, what was kind of the first indications that something was wrong for you? Were you asleep? What kind of triggered that, fight or flight thing with you? When did you know something was wrong?
Well, we knew something was wrong when the two of us were standing at the bottom of the stairs in the villa looking out on the garden on fire. We knew something was wrong very late in the day. So it was a scorcher of a day on the 23rd. I believe it was up to quite early in the day, 40s. We'd had lunch out in the garden, swimming. And, we've got to bear in mind it's just 4 days after we were married. So we were, in the honeymoon zone, and we were having a good old gossip about all sorts of shenanigans and antics that happened after we went to bed on the night of the wedding. So we were in, marvelous form, and we had a siesta as you do. And when we woke up, and I can't even give you an accurate timeline on this because I cannot describe to you the confusion of a situation like that, where Brian was awake before me and I was woken up by him calling me from the bottom of the stairs to come down, and I knew by the tone, the urgent tone, there was no dilly-dallying. And I know I've said this before, but I remember it's kind of ironic in the greater scheme of things. In the villa we were staying in, it had a very sort of long, angular, sharp wooden staircase. And I remember thinking, for God's sake, Zoe, don't slip and fall now. The last thing you need is a broken limb on your honeymoon that'll ruin everything. So I remember, even though he was calling me to get down, I was sort of tentative coming down these wooden steps. And when I got downstairs, the patio doors were wide open at the side of the house, and the whole garden, the whole side of the garden, the fence and the greenery were on fire. And I'm talking red, roaring, vivid flames of fire. There's nothing smouldering here. So basically, and the heat was phenomenal. Like the heat just threw you back. I've never experienced, nor do I hope to ever experience heat like that again. Without going into too much detail on what happened, thereafter, we got out as quickly as we could. It felt like hours, but it was probably less than a minute or two. I had to run upstairs, get dressed, grab passports. Funny that I remember the passports. Threw them in my handbag or wallets, and that was it. And we were at the front door. But of course, as you may be aware, I certainly mentioned in detail in the book, the electricity had been shut off. So our access or our escape route, was basically blocked. So we were in, it was a gated community, a gated villa. So basically the gates were about 9 feet tall for the heavy metal gates, and we couldn't open the gates. We struggled for a period of time trying to wangle them. And by the time we realised we weren't going to be able to escape by car, the car was already surrounded by flames anyway. So we had to escape by foot. And we scrambled over the gates. I dislocated my knee on landing, which was unfortunate, but to be honest with you, the adrenaline is pumping so hard through your body at that stage that I knew I was running on a wobbly leg. It doesn't really register. Pain doesn't really register. It certainly didn't at that second. And we just ran. We ran for our lives, and we ran in all different directions. And we bumped into some people who disappeared into the smoke. And at one stage, the dress that I was wearing, a long dress, caught fire. And Brian put out the flames with his bare hands, and I knew then this was not going well. And as you know, eventually they ended up encountering a car. Well, before we encountered a car on the road, let me explain to you that in this kind of inferno, it's like you're running in this tornado of fire, is the only way of describing it. So you can't see because your eyes are burning. You can't breathe because it's like swallowing acid with every single breath. I was badly burned on my legs at this stage and my arms, and eventually my hair went on fire too. So um, there was literally flames spraying everywhere. And you can't describe the level of confusion because, in fact, I only discovered several years later when I went back to Greece that we'd run in fairly a neat circle and ended up virtually across the road from where we'd started off. But we encountered a small group of children, babies. One was in a nappy, and they just popped out of the ether as if they were like little phantoms. So we didn't know where they come from, but we lifted them up in our arms anyway. And almost simultaneously, this car emerged out of the smoke, and we stopped the car, and they opened the back door, and we managed to shovel the children in the back. And then we realised with 3 adults in this small car and now 5 children, there was no room for us. And this was the only way we were going to escape. So we begged them to open the boot. They opened the boot, we climbed in, and off we went. But as you know, that didn't end well. The car crashed. Yeah, I won't go into all the details on that. Yeah.
No. I just take your time. I just I don't want to push you on anything. Yeah. And, after the car crashed and what happened then, one thing I keep going back to in my mind is that even though all those bad things happened and all, the one thing was your savior coming through the smoke, that when you thought it was over for you, there was someone there for you. It was like your guardian angel in a sense. So in that moment, did you think it was the end for you? And did that feel like forever?
There was part of me that wanted the end to come. I can't explain to you, first of all, witnessing the man that you love die right in front of your eyes.
Okay.
And then I was on fire. I mean, I was physically on fire. So my clothes were burning, my hair had sort of melted into my face, my hand had become one with the boot of the car. So, death would have been a blessing in that moment. And I just waited. I waited for it to arrive. But instead of death arriving, Nana Saliagas, who's this volunteer firefighter, lifted me from the boot of the car. He thought I was dead initially. I only found this out when we had a conversation a considerable period of time after the event on Facebook of all places. But he explained that I looked dead and I was covered by the embers of this burning tree and I was so still, but I blinked my right eye. And that's when he realised I was still alive. So he lifted me to safety. And I can remember that moment very vividly, being carried through wall after wall of fire by this, big man in a fire suit. It was almost like a spectre carrying me. And he carried me to safety. He saved my life. And it was nothing short of a miracle. And here's the really unfair part of all this, It's wonderful. The children all survived unharmed. The 3 adults in the car survived unharmed. I was rescued. I sure as hell wasn't unharmed. I was very severely burned. But the man, the man who carried those kids to safety, the man who'd spent most of his adult life dedicated to helping other people and the charity work that he voluntarily did, he's the one who was killed in that moment. And I couldn't accept the unfairness of that fact. So, in the days that followed the fire, I just decided to rewrite history and delete that fact. So I rewrote the events in my head, and I decided that if I'd been rescued, then surely there's a possibility Brian had been rescued too, even though I couldn't suspect. So I started to imagine that, potentially Brian had his own maps who carried him to safety. As we all know, sadly, that's not the case.
At that time, I suppose it helped you deal with that sudden loss. And I can imagine in those moments, you have all of these emotions. And when you're in your hospital bed, you have guilt, you have blame, you have this survivor guilt syndrome. You have so many things going on. And as you said, you look at Brian gave everything and he helped all those and he'd given everything in his life before. So it can feel really unfair. But I suppose that's the great thing about people who are heroes. They give everything till the end. And that's what he did. So you should be proud of that too, that he did all he could, as much as he could for everybody. And his actions in turn then saved your life.
Well, yes. And also, even in those very early days when I didn't know if I was going to survive, I was severely burned all over my face. My face was very badly disfigured, my chest, my arms, my hand, basically eroded to nothing, and my legs. So, I was pretty much immediately brought into surgery, and I had dozens and dozens of surgeries to try and just basically save my life. And as you know, then further down the line, I went through sepsis and all sorts of shenanigans. Unfortunate. I don't think this is probably the right word to use. But even at this very early stage, I kind of made a vow, that I would honor Brian's legacy. I would make sure that the world didn't forget him, and look, I spent an awful long time in hospitals, two hospitals, the first in Matera in Greece and eventually back in St. James's, Dublin. And as soon as I got out, which was many, many months down the line, when I could hardly walk still, I had to learn how to walk and talk and breathe and eat and basically discover all my life skills from scratch almost. But this driving force was within me to explain everything that had happened and to write about Brian and also to write about my father who passed away three weeks after the fire. And I knew that was some way that I could honour him. And it's funny because it is one of the earliest thoughts. Once I came across undisputed proof that Brian had indeed died, it was in that moment that I started writing the book in my head. While I was lying in hospital, bandaged from head to toe, and not even able to move so much as my head from left to right. That's how badly damaged it was. I was starting to write his story and the story there and then. So I knew there would be a way that I would keep his memory alive, and that was extremely important to me. And as I said to you earlier, as hard as it is, and it can be at times when I'm giving talks and I'm mentioning Brian, in doing so, there's a bitter sweetness to this because I get to show his face on a big screen and I get to say what an amazing man he was. And, often to a bunch of several hundred total strangers. And somebody always comes up to me, by the way, at the end of these talks to say, I knew Brian, wait until I tell you what he did for me. Or I went to college with Brian and he helped me study, or, I know I worked with him on wildfires.
Nice.
So there's always a little bit of a reward for me when I talk about him because he touched so many different people's lives in the best way possible.
Yes, of course. I imagine, obviously, after all the ordeal and you came back by air ambulance to Ireland and you had many months of treatments and therapies and everything. One point there, I from your book, obviously, that when you compare yourself to Sisyphus, where that kind of survivor thing as well, where you feel like you cheated death and you shouldn't have, and now you're going to have this punishment of dealing with it. So even where you had your physical pain, you get over these things, but then you'd have the psychological pain. So it's a very hard thing to balance because as you're in your hospital bed or in your rehab room and you're dealing with the physical pains, you have all of this mental anguish going on in your head as well. So it's a very hard situation to say, well, I'm going to deal with this pain first and then deal with the other, or I have to deal with them together. How did you get through that process?
Well, I think the majority of my energy was spent on physical renewal in the first few months. Because when remember, I ended up, after I contracted this rare form of sepsis called toxic epidermal necrolysis, and that the symptoms of that started to appear on that medic plane when I was coming home from Greece. And then I ended up in a coma. I had multiple organ failure. I had to be given a tracheostomy to keep me breathing, renal failure, dialysis, the whole kit and caboodle. Basically, everything started to go wrong, and my family were told not to expect for me to survive. And this was quite shocking. This was a month after the fire, when I'd been communicating with senior members of my family and close friends over in Greece. So when I awoke from the coma, that's when, my own personal physical battle began. And I realized that if I didn't put everything into learning how to walk and talk and actually breathe properly for myself and use my hand, all of these things about, I had to really put so much effort into those. Now, there's a joy in that in a very weird way, because when you put all your focus onto your physical health, you can joyfully ignore all the mental anger. So it's like I shoveled all my grief and my heartbreak and my PTSD and everything else that was secretly going on in my brain. I shoveled it all into, this little box, locked that box, and just kept putting everything into my physical health. But what happened was, when I eventually left the hospital, it was in the winter of 2018, that I had no choice then. I was at home, I was alone. And even though I was still going in and out of hospital about 4 days a week, and I was still doing all of my various physical therapies and occupational therapies, etc., I had no choice but then to have to address the mental anguish. And I've described it in my talks as a ticking time bomb of grief that just exploded. It just exploded, and I didn't want to be here anymore. After all the work I put in to walk and use my hands and everything that I had done, all that toil, that Sisyphean journey up the hill, I gave up, because I realized that the grief and the post-traumatic stress disorder, which was, by the way, absolutely horrific. I mean, I can't describe to you how realistic those flashbacks were. So in 1 minute you're, heartbroken because the love of your life was killed right in front of you. And then your dad, who was my best pal and my advocate, I mean, he and I were so close. He's gone too. So the two people I would have gone to for solace and advice are gone, and so all of this, they were all meshed up. Do you know what I mean? So it's grief, complex grief, and having to deal with body issues and flashbacks and nightmares. And so it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And I kind of tossed this coin in my head and I said, you make a choice here now. You either end it or you give it one last try, but find the help to do so. So I went to a therapist. I went to Dr. Colin James's. And at that moment, that was how crucial that decision was. I was either going to stay or I was going to go, and it all depended on, God help her if she didn't. That's what I was thinking on that day. But whether or not this woman could save my life. And then I did therapy, a lot of therapy.
Yeah, of course.
Which I'd like to say worked rather marvelously. So, I'm very much an advocate for therapy.
It's one of those things, though, because like you said, you were kind of at a crossroads there between living this life of pain and anguish and PTSD, and for a lot of people, they would have said, I just want to end it. I can't go through this anymore because the grief is too complex. It's too deep. So, you obviously made the braver decision then to carry on, and because you're still going to put yourself through that. But it's a really, nobody can ever imagine, unless they've gone through any of that. As you said, I know in your book, you felt like you lost part of your identity, you lost your life, you lost your femininity, and you're literally starting all over again, but having to repair your broken body and your broken mind. And sometimes it can seem like it's not worth fighting for. So you really had to reach and reach and reach and get out of that situation, didn't you?
Absolutely. And, guilt plays a part in that moment as well. And in this case, on a, on a positive level, because so many people have been rebuilding my body. I had had the most phenomenal level of care in the Matera and in St. James's, where I had amazing teams of surgeons and doctors and nurses do everything to save my life. And if I'm going to be really honest, that's probably the thing that actually stopped me from ending it that Christmas, because I thought to myself, well, all these people who've put so much into keeping me going, and this is what you do then, when things get too hard. So, that was a defining factor, I think, in seeking out therapy. Um, but I have to say that was, yeah. I mean, that was I've spoken a lot about. Um, I'd like to think of myself as an advocate for seeking out therapy and mental health assistance when things get too tough. And it was very intense, and I went through 2 years of intense therapy. And we're not talking about sitting there for half an hour. Some of those sessions could be 3 or 4 hours long. And it was phenomenal care and attention that went to my mental health. And CBT is a phenomenal form of treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy, because it actually you can see very quickly how it can work. It's almost like a brain training. People train, to do a marathon, or they train to upskill in work. How often do we train our brains to change our thought processes? And I could see the results. Within a couple of months, I could see the difference in performing the CBT exercises that I was given. It made a phenomenal difference. I know currently in Ireland, I don't know what it's like over in Alicante in Spain, but I know in Ireland at the moment there is a bit of a crisis. People are desperately trying to access therapy. It's not so easy. We don't seem to have enough therapists available for the mental health crisis that seems to be bubbling under the surface here. Certainly from conversations I've been having recently, particularly with a lot of parents with teenage children. But if you can find it and you can find the right therapist, my God, it's the greatest gift you can ever give yourself. And anyway, isn't it lovely to be able to talk about yourself for an hour uninterrupted?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, if you talk about yourself in front of your friends, they're like, "Come on, woe is me, stop talking." But when you're with the therapist, they're there to listen, and they want you to break down those things that are going on in your head and say, "Why do you feel like this?" So, I mean, it's great, yeah, because that's part of it, isn't it? We sometimes feel like if we talk about ourselves too much, we're being, a little, our ego is too big, or we're being a bit narcissistic, and
we're being indulgent.
Yeah. And the thing is, but with the therapist, it's a different feeling, because you have to say to yourself, well, at times I feel like this, and then you say, oh well, maybe I should stop doing that, or maybe I am a bitch, or maybe I am a bastard in the way I treat people. So the therapy is great for that, because it shows you who you really are, and it shows you how you need to change, but it also shows you the things that are holding you back, and it shows you how you can progress. And just a question on the CBT, that process.
Yeah, crucially, just on that point, it also gives you the tools. You see, sometimes you can be very aware of your own failings, or you can be very aware of your own problems, but you're like in a paper bag and you don't know how to fight your way out of it. So if you get the right therapeutic assistance, they will give you the tools that you can apply to your life. In my case, for instance, I sort of look at my brain like a filing cabinet. So with the flashbacks, as a good example. So the flashbacks could be very, very realistic. I could be walking in the park, or I could be sitting in my living room, and then all of a sudden I'm right back there in the boot of a burning car on the coast of Matty, fighting for my life. And the triggers were many and various at that early stage, and it was just horrific, and it was so realistic that I can't describe to you how realistic. I mean, the brain is a very cruel thing sometimes. It can really fool you into believing that you're somewhere entirely different. But with the filing cabinet, I suppose that's how I describe its system of CBT. What I managed to do was refile. What was happening was that event was replaying over and over again in the present day, when it should have been at the back of the cabinet, filed under July 23rd, 2018. And for some reason, my brain
right
replaying it like a little movie constantly on replay. So through CBT, I was able to train that file. It doesn't mean, by the way, the event disappears. It doesn't mean that I won't forget every minute detail of what happened that day. I will never forget anything that happened that day, sadly. And I mean, they still, those events revisit me at night time in my dreams or nightmares every night, pretty much. But at least during the day, I can cope. And it's filed back where it should be now, at the back of the filing cabinet. So things like that, I would not have known how to do that without the clinical care of an expert in her field. I wouldn't have been able to get to that place, I don't believe, by myself.
Okay. Yeah. And that's great. I mean, I'm really glad that you were able to find that path, because many others have some situations not as similar, but even, less tragic, and not being able to get through it. So well done on doing that. And I'm glad you found the help, and I'm glad you're here to tell us about that story today. What I want to ask you as well, when you made the decision to write the book and put it down on paper and tell everyone what was going on in your life and all of the things that had happened and how you were dealing with it, was that something that you felt was part of the process of grieving or part of the process of therapy?
Well, actually, I commenced that before therapy. So I really did start writing. And as soon as I left the hospital. Now, I had very little use of my left hand at the time, but so I was a two-finger typist basically for a considerable period of time. But for me, I always found writing therapeutic anyway from a very young age. So I always kept journals and diaries. So whenever I had a problem, that's how I would work things out. So this was a very natural way for me to process everything. But somewhere down the line, within a month or two, I started to realize, my goodness, there's a real story unfolding here. And some of the things that happened during that period of time, from the fire to, well, present day now, but in that period of initial stages of recovery, were remarkable. It was remarkable that I was still there. I mean, I was, I should have died on more than one occasion. And I met some phenomenal individuals. And strangely enough, in a kind of macabre way, there were some very funny things that also happened, during the hospital. I know that sounds kind of inappropriate, but that's life. You mentioned earlier that, there's always laughter at a funeral. There's in that way, even at the darkest of times, funny things can occur. So there was, I started to realize that there was quite an interesting tale to tell here. And yeah, I suppose I didn't, at the back of my head, I wanted to write about Brian. I wanted to tell the world as well about my father and about all the wonderful people and what they've done for me. I'm not sure whether I thought it was going to be a book, but very quickly it appeared that it was going to be, as I went through it. Now, the initial book, by the way, As the Smoke Clears, is the name of the book. Initially, it was a tome of letters. I mean, it was ludicrously long. It contained unnecessary detail. But when I finally whittled it down to its final version, I think it told the story of that particular year rather well, and I was very pleased with it.
Fabulous book, and it's a hard story to tell, and it's a hard story to go through again for you, because obviously you're putting this all down on paper and then you're going through it in therapy. So it's a kind of repetitive process, which is heart-wrenching, and it's hard on you and hard on your mental health and everything. But as I mentioned earlier, those struggles of putting that down on paper are helping other people, and giving other people inspiration to be able to get through their battles. So I think it's a wonderful thing what you've done. And I think anytime somebody writes a book or a journal about their life and the tragedies and everything that happened, it will always help somebody. And if you don't want to read that sort of thing, you just don't read it. But for the people that do, it's great. I mean, they can say, oh, wow, I was so inspired by this person's story, and it gave me the strength to carry on. And if you can help one or two people, that book was worth it every time.
I agree. Thank you, by the way. But I really do agree. And what surprised me was very quickly, shortly after the book was published, the letters and the messages started to come in. And boy, did they come in. And I wasn't sure if my story was going to resonate with so many people. But, the thing is pain, grief is grief, illness is illness. And, it's not a competition. you know, a lot of people may not have experienced this level of
No, no.
tragedy or pain, but they've experienced something in their life. And I was amazed how many people wanted to talk about, and by the way, very honored that people wanted to talk about their journeys as well, because there's something to be treasured in that when a total stranger contacts you and says, can I tell you about what happened to me? And they've just let it all out. And you see, there's a comfort because you are a stranger, but they'll and I think there's something to be really, treasured about that interaction. And I am a very curious person by nature. I've discovered over the last 4 years that I'm definitely nosy. I want to know about everyone's story. So I would very much welcome these things. Then I'd open up the conversation. Then I'd realize it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I really have to go to sleep and stop talking with these strangers. But the book opened up all of those to me.
Yes. And it's amazing, though, because sometimes there are things we don't want to talk about. We want to keep them hidden. But then you talk to the right person and you make that connection and they tell you their story. Or even if they don't, even if you feel you can trust them and they're a stranger and they can listen to you. I mean, sometimes you just have to go with it. And it's nice to hear people's stories, whether they be bad or good. And it's nice to hear how they've done these things in their life. And, that's a lot of the inspiration behind this podcast is it doesn't matter if I'm talking to you or a musician or an actor or a sports person. It's the things that drive them, that have pushed them on, whether it be, tragedy or, humor or whatever. And it's great to share these stories.
And doesn't everybody have a right to voice their stories? Everybody has something worthy to share. I genuinely believe that. And like you said, it doesn't have to be something that's born of sadness or of tragedy. It can be, everybody has different types of struggles. But I do think there's something, if there's one thing in particular that I really rejoice about writing this book are those communications that occurred thereafter. And they came in, as I said, in quite considerable volume, but also those conversations sort of developed organically. I touch base with people still quite frequently on social media, that I feel like they're strangers, but they're friends, and I'm chatting to one widow who recently, rejoiced in the fact that she, actually, I better not say that. She's basically found herself a new little bit of eye candy, but I mean, these are the conversations, two total strangers, and we're yapping away, and she's saying, well, listen, wait until you hear my news.
Well,
and she's excited to relate this.
Of course.
But that's fantastic. It's, that's her way of saying, I'm doing better than I was a year ago. And boy, is she doing better by the sound of things. But
It's good eye candy. No, and that's the process, isn't it? Because we always imagine when we lose someone that there can never be anybody else, but you never know. Nobody knows. And the thing about it is, it's great that woman her happiness was telling you, I've met somebody. This is a part of my life that I thought would never happen, or it's a healing process, but it's happening.
And you know what? In as much as initially people were sharing their pain, sometimes they share their healing and their joy too. And that's opened up a whole channel of communication for me that I really, really enjoy and I treasure.
That's great. And I'm curious, when you had gone through all the therapy and you were, I know you'll never finish the healing process, but when your body had healed more, and I know you're still undergoing, surgeries and it's an everyday process, but when you decided, obviously, to revisit the whole scene, or not the scene where it happened essentially, but to see those people, to meet that Manos, of that. Tell me about that process, like how you decided you were going to meet them, and was it something that came about by accident, or you thought, I want to go and see them?
Well, no, I haven't physically met Manos since then. So we communicate, we write to each other, we communicate on social media. I did go back to Greece very briefly for a court hearing, but because it was such a brief, just before COVID hit, because it was such a brief visit, I didn't get a chance to go back and even, and meet people in the hospital. But I communicate with them all. Mr. Mutiglis in particular, the surgeon who Oh, yeah, that man was just the most compassionate angel on the planet. So we write to each other. There's a phenomenal emotional connect with people who've saved your life, and you can't just let that go. I was in St. James's only a couple of days ago with Mr. Shelley, the other surgeon, the surgeon who rebuilt my hand and rebuilt my legs basically and gave me back my life. He saved my life, in fact, from the sepsis. But it's there is this huge emotional connection. There's also a need to give back. So I'm working out ways now where I can currently give back to these people. My initial way was, to talk about them in the book, but there are lots of other opportunities there to do so. And I will be going back to Greece potentially this year. I can't go into any detail on it because there is a court case ongoing. And unfortunately, I've been told, as you can imagine, it's not easy for me to keep
Okay, no problem.
mouth zipped once I get going. But basically, I have to be cautious about what I say here. But there's a large group suit ongoing regarding certain officials that made some rather diabolical decisions on that particular day on July 23rd, 2018. So that court case will be happening, and I will be going over and I will be giving testimony once more, and I fully intend on that occasion to see not only Manus but obviously to get into the Matera and see all those amazing people that really saved my life in the initial stages. So it's a strange thing to say. I'm actually looking forward to going back. Now, that's how I feel right now. It might feel very differently when I get over there, but I'm excited to see those people and basically show them, the legs work, the arms work, the eyes are still wide open. They don't see as well as they used to, but they're still wide open, and show them that it was worth their while.
Great that those people did help you, and it will be nice. And I know it will be emotional, and it will be very hard to revisit, Greece and with all the memories and everything. But on the other hand, it will also be a very positive thing to see those people and meet them again, and to see the great work they're still doing. And I'm going to let you go in a sec, but I want to just obviously speak about the work you're doing now more and more, and in your public speaking and with your writing and everything, you're helping lots of people. So when you go to an event, when you have a public speaking event and you speak to the people, do you find that lots of people actually want to speak to you personally after you've spoken?
Yes, and in fact, I always welcome questions and answers. Sometimes, time runs on and you don't often get as much time as you'd like. But yes, I always enjoy talking to people afterwards, and particularly now because we've gone through such a period of isolation. As delightful as I find myself, God, I'm bored with my own company. So, and I live alone. So there's nothing better. There's nothing better than getting out to an event and talking to a load of people.
Yeah.
And by the way, what I said earlier is really true. There's always somebody in the audience who wouldn't have known Brian. Just the other day at the event in Croke Park, this woman came up to me and she had a photo of Brian on her phone. And she said, "You won't remember me. We might have met once before." Brian was studying for a PhD in college, and she had her story to share, and they're just beautiful little gifts. They're beautiful gifts, and yes, so I always enjoy talking to people afterwards, and I always find the question and answer sessions very interesting because then you truly get to understand what people are curious about, and often they'll have their own issues that they'll want to talk about, and it's much more engaging when you have a two-way process. You know what I mean? So I really like that too. And obviously, I'm also writing at the moment for the Irish Independent. I'm doing a column, a monthly diary, which I am thoroughly enjoying, I have to say, and I'm getting great feedback on that too. So we'll see where that goes. Who knows?
And as I said earlier, I want to commend you first of all for being an amazing person to get through all of this, and for having the strength to do what a lot of people could not have done. And it's an amazing story. It's a heart-wrenching story, and it, of course, very tragic. But when on the flip side of it, then there's a lot of positives, and it's great to hear you laughing, and it's great to hear you kind of being able to smile after all the things that have happened to you. But what's even better is to hear that positivity in your voice and to hear, how you're so enthusiastic about helping all these other people and how you love what you're doing now. And, it's put you on a different path, maybe. So now maybe you're doing what you're meant to be doing. So there's always a positive outcome sometimes from these negative incidences. I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sharing your story. I know it was pretty sensitive and it's hard to talk about it, but thank you for taking that time. And I've really enjoyed talking to you,
Well, thank you, Simon, and I really do appreciate that. And you are right. We have to find the chinks of light, in life. And I've been offered little gifts along the way in recovery, so I am embracing those moments now as best as I can. So, but I really appreciate meeting you here today, and it's been a very interesting chat from my perspective too. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Really nice. So thank you very much, Zoe, and we wish you the best of luck with all your future projects, and we'd love to have you on the show again some other time. You're always welcome here, and we'll keep following your articles and future books probably, and best of luck when you do go back to Greece, and best of luck with all your future endeavors. Zoe Holohan, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Zoe, thank you very much for sharing your story. Such an amazing story, and so heart-wrenching and terrible thing to have happened to both of you, and especially after such a happy time in your wedding day. We want to commend you for being so brave and telling your story. The book is fantastic. You've done so much since then, and I know you're still rebuilding your life, but you're actually helping other people now as well, which is a great thing. We want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show, and we hope the listeners enjoyed this. We'll dedicate this show to Brian, so thank you very much, Zoe. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Okay, everybody, we hope you enjoyed the show. We will have a few more guests on. We're getting close to the end of the season 2, but we promise to have a great season 3 coming up soon as well. So, as I said before, please follow, like, and subscribe where you see those buttons. And please share this podcast with whoever you think might have an interest in it. We have all types of guests and we have all types of listeners. So, we appreciate you being here. Until the next time, my name is Simon Kay. This is the Collective Whisper Podcast. Look after yourself and your family. Take care. Bye-bye.